Hey there boys and girls, my name is Kyle, better known on the YouTubes as Blinkcraft, and today for our interaction design series, we're going to be talking about button interaction states. Now, since this topic's pretty straightforward and actually really easy to understand, we're just going to jump straight into the examples. Our first example is going to be an analog button. This type of button can be found anywhere from your car to your alarm clock to even the computer that you might currently be sitting at. It's basically just any physical button that you can interact with. Our second example is a digital interface button. These are often seen on digital tablets and on your mobile phones. And for our final example, we have graphic user interface or GUI buttons. This is somewhat similar to digital interface buttons, however, this is where the user must use or manipulate a mouse or trackpad and control an arrow on screen in order to interact with their button. So now that we've covered the three most common types of buttons, let's discuss their actual interaction states. For our analog buttons, we have two basic states. The first is our static state, where the button typically extends up and off the interface. This physically signals to the users that it is in fact a button. And its other basic state is the press state. And if you can't guess already, it's the state that becomes active when the user presses the button. Mechanical keyboards, such as the one I'm using to write and edit this, will make audible clicks when you transition between the states. But we'll talk more about that later when we come back to cover signals and cues. So, now that you've mastered the analog button, we can move on to digital buttons. Digital buttons are flat in their static state since they're on a digital device, and in order to signal to the user that you've pressed our digital button, we typically change some of the button's properties. Sometimes we even choose to play a sound. This also leads us into GUI buttons. Unlike digital buttons, GUI buttons don't need to change or play sounds when we activate them, since you're using a cursor to activate them. You know you've clicked on something because you click the analog button on your mouse to activate it. That being said, it does sometimes help to change the cursor's appearance to signal to the user that they can click on your button. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual button interaction states. Typically, we need to design a static state. This is the default state for our digital button and should be displayed when the user's mouse or tippity-tappity fingers are not engaging our buttons. Next up, we have our hover or over state. This is generally limited to GUI buttons since most mobile devices can't track your finger's position unless it's making contact with the screen. This state should change the user's cursor or the button to signal that the interaction is possible. And then we have the active state, and as the name suggests, it's active when the user activates our button. Usually for both types of our digital buttons, some of the button's properties, in order to show that we've received their interaction, will change. Our fourth state is more or less solely used for web development, since it's the visited state. This state is used when the user is no longer engaging our button, but has also previously interacted with it. For an example, in a website's main navigation, we could change the link's properties to show that the button you interacted with to load the new page that you're currently on is currently active. Now, everything we're talking about today does tie into designing affordances, which we previously talked about. And changing between button states is one way that we can afford users to use our digital buttons. However, we'll take a more in-depth look into affordances and button interaction states when we cover signals and cues later on in this series. Until then, if you have any tutorial suggestions or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. As always, my name is Kyle, you just learned something cool today, and I'll see you next time.